suicidal tendencies that creep up in my coffin. I don't wanna do no talking. Can't you see the reaper? You go crazy, you go down. I'm gonna let my chopper drown.
Hi guys, in this YouTube video I will show you how to perform a basic installation of ArchLinux32. This is the main page. When you click download, you will go to this other page. On the download page, even if down here you will see BitTorrent recommended, you don't have to select these ones because they are broken. The package PGP keys are outdated and it will be impossible to install the packages because they won't be PGP verified. Instead, it is better to download the ArchISO from one of the mirrors. For example, I pick this one closer to mine. Select the latest version, November 2021 as to the time of recording. Download the .iso file and later we will be able to perform an ArchLinux installation. When you install ArchLinux32, you will have some options to choose the repositories, the package repositories, but it will be made automatically because the system will recognize your CPU instruction set and choose the best repository for you. Another thing, if you want to install it on laptops, you should do it with Ethernet because there are some laptops, such as mine, that requires special firmware such as IP2100, IP2200 or BF43. You should also install this piece of firmware and enable them with modprob -R, the name of the firmware, to make those devices will work fine. Now let's install ArchLinux32 in a virtual machine that I have set up with 1 core and 1.5 GB of RAM. Install, press enter. To have a good system, I suggest some minimum system specs to be able to run a graphical desktop environment with some applications such as LibreOffice, the music and video player. You should have at least 1.5 2 GB of DDR2 RAM, and SSD will greatly improve your hard disk performance. At least 800 by 600 or 720p display or monitor. The graphics card, if it is integrated, it should be like the at least Intel GMA 950, newer than 2005. Intel and AMD graphics are preferred because they work better. As to Nvidia, if they are before the GTX 700 series, they will work with the open source drivers Nvidia Nouveau. The newest Nvidia graphics card, it is better to avoid them. As to the CPU, it supports all the 32-bit CPUs, but to have a good experience, I suggest at least Intel Pentium M, Celeron M via C7M, the final revision of the Pentium 4, or the most powerful 32-bit CPUs available, such as Core Solo and Core Duo, that were available in the first Apple computers that switched to Intel architecture. You should also use ArchLinux32 if you own the first generation of AMD 64-bit processor, such as Athlon 64, 64S2, Turion64 Yes, you could also run ArchLinux 64-bit on those machines, but if you think that operating system is too much heavy, you should try ArchLinux32. Here, to install ArchLinux32, first of all, let's check our hard disk, cfdisk dev sda, select DOS partition table, new partition, it will be the swap partition, it should be as big as your RAM, primary, type Linux swap, second partition, the rest of the disk, primary, write, yes, now quit. mkswap dev sda1, now turn on the swap by the command swapon dev sda1. Now the other partition, format it in ext4 file system dev sda2, and let's mount this partition to mnt. mnt is the root of our system. lsblk to check if everything is right. Now backstrap -i mnt, and we will install all the most basic packages. Backstrap -i at mnt, base level, nano. As to Linux, you can choose to install the standard Linux package, the Linux Zen kernel. It is optimized for weaker machines, and Linux Pare. That will be the best with more powerful processors such as Core Soul and Core Duo with 2 or more gigabytes of RAM. The extra RAM will be used as a swap, but it will be even faster than swap on the hard disk. And Linux firmware. But if you have a device such as the Intel Wi-Fi card that I have in my laptop, you should also install, for example, IPW2200 firmware, because if you have those devices, you will also need the extra firmware to make them work fine. And now let's install the basic packages. Now that the most basic packages are installed, let's generate the fstab by the command gen fstab -U, path is mnt to mnt etc fstab. Enter. Now we need to enter our installed system by the command root at mnt using the vim bash shell, because it is the default shell on Linux. We are inside the system. Another time update the repositories by the command pacman-sy. Now let's edit the locale. The locale will be the language of our system. Let's edit the file etc local.gen. For example, I will set up English US language. We need to delete the hashtag from the line of the language UTF-8, not 8859-1, ctrl-O to save, ctrl-S to exit and clean. Now locale gen, we are generating the locale. Another thing, echo lang equal that one that you selected, close, at etc locale.conf. Now exploit the locale lang and us.utf-8, enter. Now edit vconsole.conf, it will be your key map. For example, I continue to set up the American layout, but you are free to set up your favorite one. The next command is for the time zone. User share zone info, your continent, your city at etc local time. Now set up the clock sys2hc at UTC because it is the standard in Linux. Let's give a name to the computer. For example, ArchLinux32 at etc hostname. Let's do it another time. Edit the file etc hosts 127.0.0.1 localhost. Local domain and the name of your computer. For example, ArchLinux32. Save and exit. Now install Network Manager to connect to the internet, and if you use a graphical user interface, let's install as well Network Manager applet. To make the Network Manager icon will show up in your system toolbar if you use SFC or Matter desktop environment. Now we need to enable the services by typing systemctl enable capital N capital M Network Manager. You will see 3 new lines, it means that it works. Now by the command passwd, give a password to our root user, that is the default, and let's fix the kernel, make init cpio. Now you need to remember which kernel you have selected at the beginning. I am using Linux Pare, but you will need to change that if you use a different kernel. Enter, and it is building the image of the kernel. Now the most important part, install the bootloader. Without the bootloader the system won't boot. Install grub, it is the standard bootloader for Linux. Now the command, pay attention, it is the most important part of the installation. Target equal i386 computers because we are using 32-bit system with BIOS --, bootloader ID equal capital letters grub because we are using grub bootloader, and now the part where we will install the bootloader, it is the name of the hard disk without looking at the partition, just the single name. For me, dev SDA. Enter. Installing installation finished, no error reported. It means that it is working fine. Now create the configuration file mkconfig or put grub.cfg. Enter. Now we need to add our user. We will also give our user a shell. With the command pacman SS we can search various shells. For example, there is a fish autocompletion shell. There is also TCSH, a shell very popular on FreeBSD. KSH93, very similar to the shell used on OpenBSD, or ZSH, the shell used on the newest macOS Monterey. I like the fish shell, I will install that, otherwise the default is bash. Now user add -m-g user group will shell. The default is bin bash, but I will use bin fish. You are free to use everything that you like. And the name of the user, for me, John. Passwd user, new password, again. Now give our user root privileges. Editor equal nano vsudo. Scroll down till this tab and comment will add your user and root all equal all space save exit. Now we need to install the basic package to make the desktop work fine. For the audio and the system you have two choices. If you want to use KDE Plasma 5 or GNOME, by the way GNOME works well on ArchLinux32, but people that choose this operating system, since they have a low power hardware, I don't think it's a good idea to use GNOME on this system. I will install the older Zoig with Pulse Audio Alsa. Zoig Zenit, Zoig Server, Mesa Eastern. Enter, yes. Now the most important thing, if you use a graphical environment, your graphics driver. Let's search them by pacman xf86 video. Enter. As you can see, there are various options. ATI is for older AMD graphics card. AMD GPU for newest AMD graphics card. X86 video Intel for Intel integrated graphics. Nouveau is for NVIDIA GPUs before GTX 700. Video VMware is for virtual machine based on VMware or VirtualBox, and Video QXL is for virtual machines based on QEMU KVM. Since I will use VirtualBox, I will install x86 Video VMware. And another little package, VirtualBox guest utils, but you won't need to install them. You will only need to install the graphics drivers of the graphics card that you have installed. Now we are very close to the finish. If you use a desktop, you could reboot now and install the latest desktop packages later, but on laptops it is better to install everything before and do a single update at the end. when the desktop environment will be installed by default. Because while on desktop the Ethernet is picked up automatically, on laptops you need to connect to the command line, and it is better to do it only once to save time. Now I select the desktop environment LSD because it's very light. Let's install LSD, its display manager LSDM, another two application, HTOP and NeoFetch, web browser, enter, enter, default fonts, install yes. Now we need to enable some services such as the display manager, systemctl, enable LSDM. To be secure that we will boot into a working system, let's edit the file root.scene.trc, exec start lsd, save, exit. Let's edit the file at our username home user.scene.trc, exec start lsd, save and exit. Now exit again. The red color, it means that we exited our installed system and we are back into the ISO. umont -r/mnt. Now reboot the system and we can remove the CD drive or the USB stick that we used during installation. This is the bootloader. Enter. It is loading the kernel with pi because I installed that type of kernel. Here the login is working fine. Password. We have LSD desktop. For example, HTOP, only 120 GB of RAM usage. The terminal. NeoFetch. I am using bash shell, kernel 5.14 pi. Adwrite. Let's check Firefox. We are on Firefox version 92 for 32-bit system. Congratulations guys, now you have installed ArchLinux32. Installing it on a real machine will be the same, except for the video drivers. Don't install VMware or VirtualBox, install that one that are the same as your hardware. And here, this one at the bottom, this is the reason why I told you to install Network Manager Applet, to make it possible to connect to the Wi-Fi using this little application at the bottom of your panel. And now you know how to install ArchLinux32. See you later, guys.